1977. Endless lines stretch outside the cinemas. People stand for hours, the sun is scorching, but no one leaves. Someone holds the ticket as the greatest treasure. Others bring their children because they heard, "You have to see this." The lights go out in the hall, the first chords of John Williams' music sound, and thousands of people freeze. Golden letters appear on the screen, "A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away." And the world will never be the same again. And just a few years before, everything looked completely different. The young director George Lucas fought for his idea, received rejection after rejection, and listened to the laughter of studio bosses. Space knights? Robots and aliens? Nobody is interested in that, they said. He was left alone with his sketches and scripts, with the thought, maybe it's really useless? But it was precisely from this doubt that the birth of a legend began. Because this story is not just about cinema. It is a story about how a small dream was able to overcome distrust, a meager budget, and a grueling struggle to become the greatest cultural phenomenon of our time. It is a story about business and the human spirit. That even when no one believes, your faith can change everything. And today I'll show you the journey of Star Wars from the first line of the script to a global empire. There will be defeats, breakthroughs, and moments when everything hung in the balance. And at the end, a few lessons that you can take away for your own life. George Lucas had no plans to change cinema in his youth. He dreamed of racing. In film school, Lucas would sit in dark classrooms and spend hours watching old space series, fairy tales, and adventure films that had once captivated children in movie theaters in the 1930s and 1940s. He saw in them something more than simple entertainment. These stories had archetypes, good and evil, light and darkness, fall and rebirth. That was what he wanted to give to a new generation. In those years, cinema was completely different. Hollywood was making crime dramas and dark war films. People were looking for seriousness. And Lucas dreamed of giving them a miracle. He said to himself, "I will create a modern mythology. Something that will unite people in a sense of adventure and hope." He began to draw sketches of spaceships, write the first drafts of the script. Knights with lightsabers, wise mentors, evil empires, and rebels of light appeared on the sheets. It looked wild and unusual, but in Lucas's head everything was coming together into a single picture. He sought inspiration from world mythology, from Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey to Kurosawa's Japanese samurai films. All of this mixed in his imagination, and the idea for a new fairy tale, but for the space age, was born. It was the moment when a simple dream began to turn into an idea that would change the world. And while no one around him even guessed that this quiet guy in dark glasses and with a pile of notebooks in his hands was preparing the greatest cultural revolution in the history of cinema, Lucas went stubbornly, step by step, as if building his own distant galaxy. The dream is beautiful. But the reality of Hollywood in the 70s was very different. When George Lucas first tried to sell the script for his space tale, studio doors closed one after another. Producers laughed. They shook their heads and said, "People want serious movies. Who would be interested in robots, strange creatures, and a boy who dreams of becoming a hero?" Lucas would leave these offices exhausted, feeling like his dream was crumbling. He would return home, sit at his desk, and stare at the scattered papers. Sometimes it seemed as if he had really driven himself into a corner. His friends and colleagues would advise him to give up. "George, find another story. This is too strange." But something inside him whispered, "Don't let go." He understood that his idea was not like what was being shot in the movies at the time. It was too big, too ambitious, too expensive. But that was exactly why it was needed. Lucas saw the whole picture, starships flying over the heads of the audience, lightsaber battles, a force that invisibly permeates the entire universe. He saw what others did not see. And this was his greatest strength, but also his greatest burden. The crisis was not only in the distrust of the studios. There was another problem: money. At that time, Lucas did not have great financial opportunities. He spent everything on preparation, on artists, on the first concept art. And every time another studio refused, it was a blow to his pocket and to his confidence. There were moments when he almost gave up. Imagine the scene: late at night, he's sitting in a dark room, the light of a lamp falling on stacks of papers, and he thinks, maybe no one really needs this? Maybe I'm just inventing something for myself? These thoughts consumed him. But it was then that his first big lesson was born: even if no one believes, you have to believe yourself. Because when everything around you says no, only your inner stubbornness can become the yes that will save the idea. And yet even this stubbornness did not give him a quick victory. He walked from studio to studio, gritting his teeth, repeating the same story: a distant galaxy, the Empire and the rebels, a dark lord and a young hero. His words hung in the air, while people in suits sat opposite him, thinking only about numbers and the box office. Time passed. And then something amazing happened. The 20th Century Fox studio, which was going through difficult times itself, agreed to give him a chance. But the conditions were tough: a minimum budget, limited shooting time, complete distrust. For the management, it was an experiment that, in their opinion, was bound to fail. For Lucas, it was his last chance. And here a new level of crisis began. Because it was one thing to get permission, and quite another to see it through to the end. The filming turned into a nightmare: equipment broke, sets fell apart, actors complained about costumes, and the script had to be rewritten almost every day. The crew was getting tired, and the studio was also pressing for deadlines. Lucas worked himself to the point of exhaustion. There were days when he would just collapse into his chair, feeling like he couldn't take another day like that. Once, he was even taken to the hospital with a suspected heart attack. He was so exhausted. It seemed that the dream was about to crumble again. But it was these crises that hardened him. He understood: if you want to create something truly great, you have to go through chaos and doubt. And if you don't give up, even when everything is against you, your idea begins to shine even brighter. Thus ended the first chapter of the Star Wars story, a story that could have ended in failure before it even began. But it was at this time that Lucas learned a key lesson for himself: a dream is worth fighting for. And fighting always leads to breakthrough. You know what's most amazing about the Star Wars story? It was like a disaster movie at first. Seriously. Everything that could go wrong, went wrong. To begin with, the budget was meager. The studio gave Lucas just enough money to shut up and see if he would fail. The sets were built in a hurry. Some of the costumes looked so strange that the actors couldn't help but laugh. The set in Tunisia, where the planet Tatooine was to be filmed, turned into a test: heat of over 40 degrees, sandstorms that destroyed the sets, and equipment that simply refused to work. Here's one moment that the team will remember forever: a storm covered the set, destroyed almost all the sets, and the whole team thought it was the end. But Lucas, instead of panicking, gathered everyone and said, "We can't stop. Even if we can survive here in the desert, this movie will survive." This became their little motto. The actors were also hesitant. Harrison Ford, who played Han Solo, later admitted that he found the dialogue funny. "I didn't understand how you could say those words seriously." Mark Hamill, the young Luke Skywalker, was afraid that it would ruin his career. And Alec Guinness, an experienced actor, considered the script childish, but agreed to act only for the money. It seemed as if even the closest team did not believe in Lucas's plan. But despite the chaos, the first glimmers of magic appeared. One of them was work on special effects. Lucas created the studio Industrial Light and Magic literally from scratch. It was a group of young technology enthusiasts who, in garage conditions, assembled cameras, invented new shooting methods and built spaceships from scrap materials. They worked at night, pasted over models with parts from children's construction sets and old cars, and then filmed in a way that looked more real than any blockbuster of the time. Another hook is the music. Lucas understood that without a strong emotional background, his story would not work. Then he invited John Williams to write the soundtrack. And this is where a legend was born. Imagine this moment, a dark recording studio, the orchestra takes the first notes, and suddenly the space is filled with a melody that makes your skin crawl. It was the music that raised the story to a new level. But perhaps the most powerful moment came during editing. The script was rewritten on the fly, the shooting was chaotic, but when Lucas started putting it all together, he saw what he had believed in from the beginning. The galaxy came to life on the screen. And when he showed the first draft to his director friends, most of them shrugged, "That's weird. It's not going to work." Only Steven Spielberg said, "George, you've got something. It's going to be a big hit." And it was this support, this small ray of faith, that became the fuel for Lucas. He kept going, even when everything looked like a failure. And then, when the premiere came, something happened that almost no one believed. Imagine, a movie theater in Los Angeles, May 25, 1977. Lucas nervously paces the aisle, thinking that people will laugh and leave after the first 10 minutes. But when the credits roll and the starships fill the screen, the theater explodes. Children scream with delight, adults applaud, and Lucas himself sits there, unable to believe that this is really happening. That day was a turning point. What seemed doomed to fail turned into the beginning of a new universe. And that's where the fun began. Because Star Wars didn't just come out, it blew up the world. It was the moment when cinema stopped being just a story you watched and became a whole universe you could immerse yourself in. After the premiere in May 1977, things didn't go according to plan, but in the other direction. People were lined up outside the movie theaters. Imagine the lines that stretched for blocks. Thousands of people waited for hours to see this movie at least once. Tickets were sold out so quickly that theater owners didn't have time to print new posters. And then something happened that changed the rules of the game forever. Fox, which didn't believe in the movie, gave Lucas the merchandising rights. So they decided, okay, the movie might flop, but who's going to buy the toys based on it? It was the studio's biggest mistake, and Lucas's greatest stroke of genius. Because when kids left the theaters, they didn't just want to see the movie again. They wanted to take it home with them. They wanted a lightsaber, a stormtrooper, a Luke or Darth Vader figure. And when the first toys appeared, the madness began. Stores couldn't keep up with new batches, and parents were ready to stand in lines at night to buy at least one small figure for their child. And then it became clear, Star Wars is more than a movie. It's a brand. It's a culture. It's a phenomenon that permeated everything: children's rooms, language, jokes, even politics. People began to live this story. But behind this success was also pressure. Lucas felt that he had created a monster, in a good way. Demand grew, people wanted a sequel, and the studio began to demand new parts. This was the moment when a simple idea turned into a franchise. And here Lucas faced a new question: how not to spoil the magic. One of the hooks of this story is that Lucas himself wasn't sure he could pull through. He was exhausted from the first shoots, his health was failing, and he even considered abandoning the story. But that's when people came along to pick up the torch. Directors, writers, designers, they believed they could expand this world. And we all know the result. The Empire Strikes Back was more than just a sequel. It proved that Star Wars has depth, drama, and darkness. And the scene with the phrase, "I am your father," became perhaps one of the biggest shocks in the history of cinema. And then came Return of the Jedi, and the world finally understood, this is not a temporary fad. This is a legend. This is a modern myth. Imagine, in a few years, Star Wars has become a new religion of pop culture. People celebrated May 4th as Star Wars Day. Quotes from the film have become aphorisms. And the name George Lucas is a symbol of the fact that even the craziest idea can change the world. But do you know where the real intrigue lies? This wasn't the end of it yet. Because the real challenges lay ahead: new episodes, fan disappointment, intense pressure, and a fight for the legacy. By the early 90s, Star Wars had taken on a life of its own. Comics, books, video games, the universe had expanded far beyond the movie screen. But time passed, and fans began to wait for the main thing, the continuation of the story. George Lucas, who had once dreamed only of finishing the first film, now faced a challenge: to return Star Wars to the big screen after a long hiatus. In 1999, an event that millions had been waiting for happened. The release of The Phantom Menace. The lines outside the cinemas were as long as in 1977. People slept on the sidewalks to be the first to get into the hall. The world froze in anticipation. But instead of general delight, mixed reviews were heard. Some fans applauded the large-scale battles and new heroes, while others were disappointed. They were annoyed by Jar Jar Binks, an excess of computer graphics, and in general, the feeling that the magic had disappeared. It was a moment of pain. For Lucas, who had put his soul into it, it felt like a stab in the back. He wasn't just making movies, he was trying to create a new epic saga, to show how darkness gradually conquers the world. But the audience didn't always see that depth. They wanted the same feeling they had as children when they first saw a Star Cruiser on the screen. And Lucas found himself in a trap: how to give people something new, but at the same time leave the magic of the past. Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith only intensified these controversies. Some fans again criticized the films, but others began to see important depth in them: the story of the fall of a hero who becomes evil. And although Lucas faced incredible pressure, he did what he had once promised: he told a story from beginning to end. He proved that even through a barrage of criticism, you can move towards your goal. But at the same time, something else was happening. The world was changing rapidly. Hollywood was becoming a machine that demanded more and more money and franchises. And Lucas began to feel tired. It seemed to him that Star Wars had grown so much that he no longer controlled it. And then he made a decision that shocked the whole world. In 2012, he sold Lucasfilm to Disney. It was a transformation not only for the franchise, but for Lucas himself. The man who dreamed of a fairy tale for children handed over his universe to another giant. For some, it seemed like a betrayal; for others, a chance for a new life for the story. But once Disney took Star Wars into their own hands, the world froze in anticipation. Could they keep the magic? 2012. The news that George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney Corporation for more than $4 billion went around the world like an explosion. For some, it was the end of an era: the creator gave away his brainchild. For others, it was a new chance: the legend got a second wind. And Disney immediately made a loud statement: Star Wars would return to the big screen. 2015, the release of The Force Awakens. The halls are full again. Fans from all over the world cry with nostalgia when they see Han Solo, Leia, Chewbacca. It was a triumph, but also a new beginning. The film earned billions. It seemed that the universe had united millions of people again. However, the joy was quickly followed by controversy. The next parts, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, split fans in half. Some saw them as bold attempts to update the story, others as a betrayal of the legacy. The internet exploded with discussions. "This is not the Star Wars we knew," said some. "This is how it should develop," replied others. Disney understood, working with heritage is not just a business, it is a balance between soul and expectations. They expanded the franchise with TV series. The Mandalorian became a real sensation. Little Grogu, whom the world knows as Little Yoda, became an icon of the internet. Andor showed a completely different side of the universe, dark, realistic, political. But even during this period of huge success, fan wars did not subside. Some demanded more experiments, others, the return of the classics. And this is where the main problem of the modern era appeared: Star Wars no longer belonged to one creator. It was already the common property of millions of people. And everyone wanted to see their version of this story. But, if you look more broadly, this is the power of the franchise. It lives, develops, sometimes annoys, sometimes inspires. It is a mirror of time. From the fairy tale of the 70s to the political dramas of the 2000s, from the nostalgia of the 2010s to the series of a new generation. And there are still many experiments, new films, new heroes ahead. You can argue endlessly about which parts are better, who ruined the legacy, or whether Disney should have been sold. But the fact remains, no other story in cinema has lasted so long or influenced so many generations.